running is a very small part of me as a person. And so I do think this entire past year has been a great exercise in athletes to kind of embrace all parts of yourself, and to realize that you have more to offer than just running, and feel free to speak your mind about it.
This is Running for Real, the podcast for runners who know that for every runner's high, there are just as many lows. All those just missed PRs, easy runs that feel hard, injury blues, and more. Each week, we'll talk to running, health, and wellness experts about their highs, lows, and best advice to build our confidence. Running for Real is about being honest, being brave, and most of all, not feeling alone. And now here's our host, Tina Muir.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 232 of the Running for Real podcast. Thank you for joining me today. And thank you for all the kind and supportive words you have been giving about the episode last week with Stephen Leese. That was a pretty brave thing of him and them to do. And I was a little nervous, to be honest, about bringing it up. I wasn't sure how it would be brought about, but I really appreciate the support. And I've been loving hearing that you are feeling so good about the brand and just so appreciative of them. And if you already were a raving fan, I'm sure you are even more so. I will be telling you more about my coupon code, some of my favorite items in this episode, to let you know just some of my favorite styles and colors that I recommend. But for now, I want to get back to today's episode, which is with Amelia Boone. I am excited to bring Amelia back on the show. It's been a long time since she was on the show, and we dive into some different topics today. Amelia's story has been covered in detail a lot, but as usual, I wanted to get to a different part of her story, a different part of her journey, and what she's learned in the last few years. She's been through a lot. 2020 has been a tough year for everyone, but Amelia has been very open and vulnerable about some of the struggles she has been going through, and we're going to get into some of those today. We're also going to talk about some of the things that are a little bit uncomfortable, but I think it's good learning for all of us to hear this conversation, and I always appreciate Amelia for her vulnerability in the way that she approaches things. So without any further ado, I'm just going to take a moment to thank our sponsor Momentous, and we right to the episode with Amelia Boone. Thank you to Momentous for sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast. And if this episode hasn't really made it clear enough, it really is important to me that the brands that I work with, I believe in the heart, the nature, the just genuineness of the companies. And that is why I am really, really picky about which brands I work with. It has to be more than their products. It has to be about them as people. And I usually do require getting to know someone pretty high up to make sure that I do feel like their heart is in the right place and that they're building a culture that I believe in. And I definitely feel that is the case with Momentous. I've really enjoyed getting to know their founder and CEO, Matt Wan. And today I want to tell you a bit about their creatine. Momentous Performance Creatine is this pure NSF certified for sport creatine monohydrate formula. Now, creatine is an amino acid that supports increased energy production and muscle power output. So its primary role is the recycling of ATP, going back to your science lessons there, which is the main source of energy for muscle and brain cells. Creatine also promotes lean body mass and cognitive function. So we can benefit from this in our running and within our lives. It can benefit any athlete, particularly aging athletes whose natural amount of creatine will decrease over time. So if you are an older runner and you are struggling with injuries, or you are struggling with your running, just getting your feet back under you, this might be something you want to consider. So creatine can also act as an antioxidant in the brain, which not many people know, which I think is pretty cool. And actually there is a video I'll put one in the show notes for today, talking about the science behind creatine, why it is helpful for runners, what it's going to help you do. So definitely recommend the Momentous creatine, and you can get 20% off your order. So you can go get my 3 favorite products, which are collagen, elite sleep, and creatine, or just one of those if you prefer, by going to livemomentous.com. And if you use code TINA, you will get 20% off. That's livemomentous.com. And using code TINA, you will get 20% off your order. So that creatine is going to be a wonderful thing you can take to help with your recovery, to help with your body just being able to handle the training. And as we mentioned, cognitive function. Who couldn't benefit from having better cognitive function? Thank you so much for listening to this, and thank you to Momentous for sponsoring this episode. Amelia, thank you so much for joining me back on the Running for Real podcast. You were with me in episode 10. This is episode 232, I think. So, I mean, that's a long time. We got a lot to go over. So welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And that's incredible. And congrats to you. I mean, that's a lot of episodes, and honored to be back on.
Yeah, thank you. We've been going back and forth in this for about a year now, just trying to find a time and a situation for both of us that would work. And I'm glad that we have been able to find that, with both having different projects, different struggles and things like that. So since you came on the show, I'm not going to go over, for the listeners, as probably expected, I'm not going to go over the same things that Amelia has covered in the past. There's a lot of good interviews that you have done, For the Long Run being one, Rich Roll. I'll have another Obstacle Racing Media. There's plenty more, I'm sure. So if you want to hear the backstory, go to those ones. You can obviously go to episode 10 as well. But since you last came on the show, you have shared about your eating disorder. You have talked about your recovery. You've kind of had your story somewhat in the public eye, although I'd say the last 6 months it's been less in the forefront of people's minds, I'd imagine. But when you did a lot of these interviews, you talked about you did not want to be known as the girl or the woman with the eating disorder. Would you say, looking back now, that has become the case? And if it has, do you feel more at peace with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that there was a big fear that I had that if I came out, if I talked about this, and if I talked about having an eating disorder, especially as an athlete and a high level athlete, that I would be pigeonholed. And honestly, I don't really feel like that. I feel like I can control the narrative. And in terms of like how I want to put myself out there. And if anything, it's more about how I see myself now. And what I realized, I think that I have this huge fear of just being known as that girl, that athlete. And if anything, that was just kind of my own insecurities of that was all that I was, and that I had nothing else beyond that. And I think that really this entire process has been one of like kind of coming into my own, and not recognizing that, yes, this mental health struggle is a huge part of my life, and it has been a very large part of my life for many, many years, but that's not all that I am. Mm-hmm. And I think that, in talking to people and in talking to other athletes and stuff like that, it's not something that I feel like I have this scarlet letter on me about, because unfortunately it is so common, in the athletic world and in the running world. Mm-hmm. So if anything, it almost, there's a lot of solidarity, I think, in knowing that there are so many others out there who, can relate and can understand. And, there is that community aspect.
For sure. And, as someone else who I think has pretty much been branded the girl who didn't have a period, I definitely understand the being in that club, having worked through some version of an eating disorder that I had, or I guess I do believe still working on. I personally don't know if we ever get to a place you can say it's gone. But I wonder, you said there that a lot of it was the way you looked at yourself. And I wonder if that is the case with all of it, that both you and I very much came out with these stories and said, I'm more than this. But as you said, we believed that we didn't have more to give. And at first you're kind of, and this is me speaking, I was kind of grasping at straws, taking that validation from everyone else. Like, give me your support, give me your love. I need your love. I need it all around me. But then over the years, I've learned to say that that's really nice. And that's really thoughtful and sweet that you think of me and you say nice things. But actually, the only one that matters is maybe a few people in my life, maybe a few, but mostly what I think about myself in terms of that. And It's a strange shift, isn't it?
It is absolutely. And I think that one of the best pieces of advice that I got was from Brad Stolberg. I talked to him before while I was still in treatment, and asked him about, told him that I was thinking about coming out and talking about something like this. And he had the previous year written a piece about dealing with obsessive compulsive disorder, as an adult male. And, he got a lot of attention for it. And he said, you're going to get a lot of validation. You're going to get a lot of feedback from people applauding you and saying really nice things. At the end of the day, like, that attention will fade and you're still going to be dealing with a problem. So you're going to get this dopamine hit of people relating and people saying you're so brave, but it doesn't fix anything. And so you have to kind of understand that at the end of the day, that the process is still yours, and that, talking about it publicly isn't going to change anything. And so I think that gave me actually a lot of perspective in kind of understanding how to thread the needle between sharing parts of myself and sharing a story that I feel like, could help others and actually was frankly more beneficial for me probably. But in terms of just feeling like what was in the outside world kind of matched what I thought about myself on the inside. And I think that it's been a journey to kind of like keep that all in perspective for myself.
Have you gone through any stages where you have forgotten that message and continued to seek that external validation? I think I definitely went through some stages where I was putting things out, but almost because, like you said about those dopamine hits, the level had dropped. And I'd be like, I felt like I needed to say something so that more of it would come in. And since then I've got to the point where if I share something, it's because I'm experiencing it. And if it works, if it helps you, great. If it doesn't, well, maybe someone else's message will. Have you gone through phases of struggling with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that, we all, and this is a huge struggle with social media and the world that we live in now, because you can kind of figure out what people relate to. And, I think that sometimes I have to ask myself when I write, and when I put out blog posts, like, what is the reason that I'm doing this, and what is the intent behind it? And then kind of like to keep that in perspective, that it will resonate sometimes with people, like a lot of people. Sometimes it'll resonate with just a very tiny group of people. But I think that another thing that I've learned is that sometimes I feel it's more important to me to like get through to a very small group or relate or things like that, versus, having broad mass appeal. But I think that it is, there are definite times where it's like, oh, you have this attention and then it goes away. And I think for anyone who is self-aware, you have to admit, yeah, that kind of sucks, when you go through those waves. But at the end of the day, like, I've learned so much over the years that external validation, I could have gotten all the external validation in the world, and it would never change how I felt about myself on the inside. And it's when I was racing nonstop and winning nonstop and just tons and tons of praise, and I was miserable. So it's never going to fill me up like my own kind of internal compass. And then what I've realized is a very small community of people around me that are kind of, like my crew. And really kind of focus on that as the important aspect. But it's hard. I think we all kind of slip up sometimes,
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say that I think a lot of people will be thinking, well, you have this big following and your crew may be a bigger crew than I would have, but this, let's say you have 200 people and you're post normally gets 15 likes and today it got 6. And then you're seeking that external validation of maybe you're sharing all your runs and then all of a sudden you're injured and you're trying to figure out what to do. So I think what you said can apply to everyone listening, even if you, to the listeners, don't feel that you have that same group, that same, I guess, reach that Amelia might have or that I might have. But as you said, I think we all go through that on some scale, in some way, that we're searching for that validation. When, the only people that can actually solve, or the only person that can actually make it stick is you. So, it's interesting to think about.
And I think absolutely. And I think in a lot of ways, I've pulled back a lot more from social media and posting and things like that, just to experiment too, to see like, what are the feelings that you go through? And I think that it's great. Anybody who like completely detoxes from it, sometimes you start to realize you're like, it just loses the appeal. And so, but it is, I think, in a lot of ways, it's just become, I don't want to say a necessary evil of our society, but perhaps. And there's a lot of good that comes from it too. But I think it's always just kind of questioning the intents and the motives and whatnot.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm constantly questioning that on this podcast with guests, and I love to hear the different perspectives. Because it just, we're going to find out in 20 years how this is affecting us. So you mentioned about...
Oh, absolutely.
You mentioned about lessons learned. You mentioned about growth that you've done. Ignoring the elements of a pandemic, an election year, and all the other, the kind of systemic racism opening into the society of understanding. So ignoring the specific parts of 2020, what have you learned about yourself, about being in recovery? Now you can look back a bit on that initial time that you spent in treatment.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the number one thing that I've learned is what it was that I've been seeking all these years. Not necessarily seeking through the eating disorder, but seeking in my life and what was important. And to me, that was community. And I needed, the eating disorders are very isolating, diseases. They thrive in secrecy. They thrive in lies. They thrive in, pulling the wool over people's eyes. And I think, for a good 20 years, I lied to a lot of people in my life, and not because I wanted to, but because I wanted to keep my secret safe. And the disorder wanted me to keep it safe. And I think being in recovery, and when you air all that out to the world, and kind of understanding that, that actually, all the lies, the secretiveness, just the withdrawing, the isolation, was impeding the thing that I really wanted in life, which was love and community and a strong support network. And so for me, that I made a very conscious decision in treatment last year that I was going to write down my top values and start living my life according to those values. And the number one on that was community, which is the reason that I uprooted myself and I moved to Colorado, from California, because I was I pretty much had zero friends, in person in California. There was a reason I went to race every weekend. It was to see my friends that were through racing. And so I kind of realized I needed to change something in my life, either try and make a community in California or move somewhere where I already had a lot of friends and community. And so the biggest thing in this past year for me has been kind of just every time that I try and make a life decision, being like, is this in accordance with what I value? And the things that are really important to me. And so I think that's one thing that I'm really proud of, is actually starting to act on those and changing my life in a way to set it up, that is actually what I want, not what I thought I wanted for so many years.
Could you share with the listeners, if they are feeling that sense of what you did, that something is missing, that they need, that they're just not feeling fulfilled? What are the steps you went through to figure those out? the values?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there was a type of therapy we did called ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, I think. I may be screwing that up. But it is very much about like listing your core values and the things that are motivating you. And then trying to align your actions with that. And then looking at, okay, if my value is community, is this action moving towards that value or is it moving away from that value? And so it's kind of hard to describe concretely, but it was a lot of list making for me. It was a lot of just like spitballing ideas of what am I doing and what am I doing in my day to day to move towards these? And in what ways is my eating disorder then like detracting me from these? And so really like keeping that in perspective. And at the same time, every time now that I have days when I have eating disorder thoughts that are very, very loud and telling me to give in, to take actions that are not, in alignment with recovery, I like have a list of my values and I just like look at them like, okay, am I moving towards these? Am I moving away from these? And just kind of keeping that forefront and center.
I love that. Thank you. And I will put a link in the show notes to some information about ACT because I've definitely heard of that as well. And it's definitely a lot of psychologists recommend it. I definitely have seen some benefits in that. So, but just back to you moving, was there that's a huge change to make. And yes, making it during a pandemic probably wouldn't have been what you envisioned, but even more, that makes this question more important. One day it came to you, I need to move, or one day you looked at your values, oh wow, this isn't aligned, I need to move right now, let's get the ball in motion, I'm going to get myself going right now? Or was there that back and forth of, oh, is this the right choice? Because that's such a huge decision to make. So how did you navigate that once that voice came through that said, this is what I need to do?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I had been flirting with the idea for a few years. And so it's not something, and if anybody knows, my biggest weakness is making decisions. I'm awful with decision making. Horrible. I waffle back and forth. I wish I could be one of those people that's just like, yep, let's do it. Instead, I'm just like catastrophizing and imagining worst case scenarios. So it's definitely like a very, very slow crawl to get to the point. And I mean, I was in treatment in spring of 2019. And then I made a commitment when I left in like June. I remember telling my therapist, I was like, within 6 months, I was like, I will be moving, or I was like, I will set it in action. That was like one of the things that we did. And I think it was a little bit after 6 months, but it was actually January of 2020 that I got approval and like made the commitment and everything like that. Found a place in Colorado. And then the pandemic hit. And I sat there going, wait, am I still going through with this? But yeah, it was it definitely was not a quick or a rash decision. Those don't really occur in my world.
And there is nothing wrong with that. I do remember us having a team meeting at Ultra at one point, and you and I had both, because I moved end of April, and I think you moved maybe after that, slightly after that, or just before.
Yeah, around that time frame. Yeah,
and we were both sitting there with boxes everywhere and just a mess, and everyone else is saying, "Oh, the pandemic has made me at home, and I'm just doing this." And we were like, "Yeah, I moved house." And you moved across the country, so it was funny to hear. Okay, so going back to just sticking on the recovery topic for a few more minutes here. One thing I know that many people wonder about, and I would have been curious about this in the past, particularly as I took the extreme method of stopping all exercise, eating everything and anything, doing like all in one go, let's go for it. And as I have said many times, I could do that, but I understand that for a lot of people, that wouldn't even be a possibility, no matter how much they wanted it to be able to just stop like that. So that said, for someone who is listening and thinking, how can someone be in recovery from an eating disorder, yet still be able to train and run, and for you even race? Tell us, how that is the case. What are some of the advantages of doing that? As this is not something you decided to do because you said to your doctors, I don't care what you say, I'm going to keep exercising anyway. This is actually a method that people use now within eating disorder recovery. So yeah, explain a bit about it.
Yeah, and this is a very tough question. And I think initially I did get a bit, when I came out of treatment, I think I was geared up to be kind of defensive about it. Cause I was prepared for all these questions being like, you can't run and be in eating disorder recovery. And I actually did get a lot of comments like that. Yeah. And I think that immediately kind of triggers that defensive reaction of me being like, no, I can, I promise. But I also I had to take a really hard look at myself, and kind of tease out. And that was a big reason of going to the treatment center that I did go to, which is Opal Food and Body in Seattle, because they actually work with athletes and they understand that not all athletics comes from a place of disorder, but you need to kind of tease out within each person what is disordered versus what is not. And that requires a lot of really hard self-examination in myself, and like looking at my old patterns and looking at my old habits, and then trying to understand, can I nourish myself properly enough to still continue what I love to do? Or, like what is more important? Speaking about values, what is more important to me? Is it more important for me to like hang on to this eating disorder, or for me to be out there and competing and doing what I love to do in a healthy way? And so it was a lot of, for me, it's running. It's looking at, okay, every time I go out for a run, I kind of jot down, like, what am I thinking about? What are my feelings? How am I going into this? I do think that breaks are good for people in recovery. Because I've had so many injuries, I'm kind of good at breaks from running. I know that sounds weird.
Would you take time off all exercise at any point during your recoveries? Okay, you did.
Yeah. So I went into the treatment facility with a calcaneal stress fracture. So I was actually on rest at that point, anyway. But I do realize I did take, after that, in trying to get my hormones in balance and everything like that, some other extended breaks from running. And I realized it's harder to do when you're healthy and you're physically able to run, but you're just saying like, no, this is probably not a good scenario for me right now. But it is interesting what comes up, and I'm sure you can relate to this, is what comes up for you and what are you thinking about when you aren't able to, or when you choose to take a break on your own. And I always found for myself that the anticipation of that was actually worse than the day to day. Once I kind of got into a routine without running, I was like, it's not that bad. You have like a withdrawal symptom for a little bit, but then if you can ride that wave,
there's some nice benefits with your, like, I remember not having to wash my hair and being like, I can make my hair look nice and it'll actually stay nice for 3 days, like,
right.
Yeah. Or not showering.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it is very much something that I don't think there is a perfect answer. And I fully admit that, there are times where I still question, am I doing this out of disorder? And I'm constantly checking in with myself. So I don't have it figured out, but I do think that is really important, that if you do want to be an athlete throughout recovery, like, you have to be 100% honest with yourself and your treatment team around you. And the number one tip that I have, for anyone who's trying to navigate this is, so I still follow like a meal plan pretty much. And that I know that I have a base number that I need to hit per day. And that's non-negotiable. Like, if I don't hit what is in my meal plan for that day, or like, and at least go over that, then there is no training. And so I think that like, especially early on in recovery, that can help you like stay on track to have those guide rails.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely used that during the early stages as well. And it was helpful to even see volumes of how much things are. Although that said, how does that not stop you from exaggerating things? Like, oh, well, maybe I had, I think I probably had 2 servings of this, you know, when really maybe you had just over 1. Like, what stops you from kind of fudging the numbers a bit to get that like check done for the day when maybe you haven't?
Right. Well, knowing the consequences of that, because I have definitely did that for many years, like kind of half-ass telling myself I'm following this, I'm trying to get in, like before I went into treatment this final time. And then realizing every time I did that, I ended up with another stress fracture. So, like for me, it's not worth it anymore. I'm so terrified of bone injuries. And I just every time, if I don't feel like eating something, I just tell myself, I'm like, you would rather eat this right now than be sidelined for 8 weeks with another stress fracture.
Thank you to Gooder for sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast. I am really excited to tell you about our new sponsor today, which is Gooder. I indicated that last week. That was one of my things I said I really wanted to have if I was going to partner with Gooder, was to have an interview with their CEO, Stephen Leese. If you missed that one last week, you can go back and listen to that one. And it was a really great interview, and it was something that I feel cleared up a lot that was left unsaid before. So if you missed that one, go back to listen to it. But I'm really excited to tell you about Gooder. I have been wearing their sunglasses for many, many years now. My husband and I both love them. We have been using them for years, and some of my favorites, I do love a Ginger's Soul. That's probably the ultimate classic. I also love the Mick and Keith's Midnight Ramble and the Electric Dinotopia Carnival. I have a ton of their glasses. I mean, they're everywhere in my house. I've been loving them for years. So I'm very excited about this partnership. And I love that there's so much fun and personality within this brand. They look at the problem with regular sunglasses, which are they're ugly, expensive, and over-engineered, and they found a solution, the Gooder solution as they call it, which is fun, fashionable, functional, and affordable. Crossing out the AF, obviously. That's a little fun thing that they like to do. There's tons of good stuff. You have free US shipping with your order of $50 or more, 30-day free returns, 1-year warranty. And 2 of my favorite things about them, they are 100% carbon neutral, and they are a member of 1% for the Planet. They also donated, as Stephen talked about last year, to Protect Our Winters and Cal State Parks. So they are really just doing good things for the planet and doing things to offset what they are doing. You will also hear, you would have heard last week in that episode with Stephen about some of the measures they are taking to remove plastic from every aspect of their packaging, including taking on some big retailers saying we are not going to be selling our product at your store unless we are not allowed to use plastic. So they really are standing by that, and I really appreciate them for that. They are the 2-time Runner's World Gear of the Year winning brand. And they're just a really good brand to care about. Again, I loved that interview a few weeks ago that you can go listen to. And you can go to gooder.com/Tina. That's GOODR.com/Tina to get 15% off your order and free shipping on your first pair. And I am really excited to hear what you think. If you are a brand new Gooder user, or if you are a raving fan already, you can tag me in your post with Gooders. I would love to see you wearing them. Tag them, tag me, and yeah, just let me know what you think. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to Gooder for sponsoring this episode.
If I don't feel like eating something, I just tell myself, I'm like, you would rather eat this right now than be sidelined for 8 weeks with another stress fracture. So do it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I've talked a lot about how, for me, in many ways, not getting injuries was a detriment, or like it was it stopped me from taking action because I didn't have those injuries. So I could say, well, you know, if I was in a bad place, I'd be getting injuries, when that allowed me to make an excuse for it. So, I mean, you know, there's no perfect situation, but I have often wondered about that, how my mindset would have been different had I had a lot of injuries along the way. Okay, one last thing I want to say to the listeners before we transition. Amelia, I saw that you shared in one of your posts a few months ago something about if running had zero impact on the shape or size of your body, would you still do it? And I've heard Nancy Clark saying this a lot. So I wanted to ask everyone listening, you right now, pause this recording and just think about that for a few minutes. Think about, would you still exercise, as Amelia said in that quote, if it had no impact on your shape or size? And I just want everyone to take a moment to think about that, because it's a really important question. And even if you're not quite ready to deal with the answer, it will at least plant a seed so you can start thinking about it, at least subconsciously, but if you're not ready to address it consciously. So anything else you want to say on that topic before we move on?
No, I mean, I think that's a very good summary. Yeah. Absolutely. And that's a question I come back to all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all need to, because it's very easy, particularly this time of year, to slip into that mindset when there's all the weight loss and get yourself in shape. It's a new year, new you, that messaging.
New year. Yeah, I was just going to say that. New year, new you. I
know. Especially 2021, we can just let that go, because I think we've got enough stress on us for the beginning of the year for once. Okay, so kind of related, but you did the Backyard Ultra this year, 137 miles, which I just can't even wrap my brain around. But how many did Courtney do?
Oh, what, 273 maybe? So like double what I did.
Insane. So, I mean, it's just hard to imagine doing that, even 137. But one thing about that was, you said about it was such a big difference for you being able to be in the moment, to not be allowing disordered thoughts to control the situation you were in, and being someone who, sorry, we're still on this topic a little bit, being someone, I remember finishing marathons, being in the shower and being like, well, I've like kind of almost like cashing a paycheck. Like, well, I've built up 2,000 calories that I can just go mad, whatever I want to get, you know, like, and I look back on that now and I think that's so like sad that I thought that way when I had done this amazing thing. And all I could think about was like, I get to eat what I want now, which is sad. But tell us about the difference in doing Backyard Ultra this year. And it doesn't have to be about this disordered thoughts, but just your mindset this year and how it was different.
Yeah. And I think there's a number of things that this year actually has been the, knock on wood, this past year was the longest streak of being healthy that in terms of running and consistency that I've ever had. So going into it, it's like I had a lot more confidence in my body to be able to withstand mileage. You know, just feeling like I actually finally had a base and was able to get consistent training in and wasn't terrified of injury all the time. And so for me, you know, also with such few opportunities to race in 2020, and then also dealing with do I race? Do I not race? Like, what's the ramifications of that with COVID and everything? But just really for me, it's like, it was almost like a celebration. I wrote to my coach. I was like, that was 137 miles of celebration of life. I think, you know, also the knowledge that to do well in a race like that, you have to fuel yourself constantly, and you have to, you know, err on the side of almost overfueling, because it just drags on for days and days and days. And, I think I realized actually it wasn't even conscious. It was the first time during the race, where I was thinking, I was like, I'm eating every hour and I'm doing all my things, and I'm not actually like, there's not that little tiny voice in the back of my mind going, maybe you shouldn't be eating that much, Amelia. Like, do you need to be fueling that much right now? And for me, that was just a huge win. And it wasn't until like halfway through the race, I'm like, I didn't realize I'm not even thinking about that right now. And I don't really know where that switch flipped in this past year and a half, but I think for me, that was really huge.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then another thing you mentioned with that race was about those thoughts of, have I done enough? Is that enough? And that relates to runners in a whole host of ways. I mean, it doesn't have to be, is 137 miles enough or 136, but I think we all do that. It's, when you've got a niggling injury and you don't want to take one day off longer than you need, quote unquote, to take. So you push the boundary of that. Is that enough? Is that enough days off? Or when you finish a run or a race or a workout or something, was that enough miles? Was that enough? Did I push myself enough? Tell us about how you've learned to deal with those thoughts of, unrelated to other things, but we as runners go through them so much of that. Is it enough?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, Bakes is a weird race, and it's the only race where I can say I only ran 137 miles because the winner runs double that. And what I've kind of realized is that you can't have any ego going into a race like a backyard, because someone is, unless you are the last person standing, someone is always going to do better than you. And and I won't lie, there are parts of me that are, oh God, I wish I just gotten to 150, or I really wanted to get to 200, and kind of sheepish about what I had accomplished. But then flipping that on its head and being like, Amelia, that's the furthest you've ever run. And, this is only like the second time you've ever run 100 miles. And to be proud of yourself for that. But it is hard when that race is a comparison, and so you say, well, I ran 137, but so-and-so ran 270. But I think it's good for me to just say, that was all that you had in you that day. That was, you gave it all out there, and giving it your all, and knowing that you went to the point, that you could, and that's enough for that day. It's not to say that in a year or two, like, you could do more, but just being satisfied with that. But it's hard. I mean, I won't lie. There's that part like, could I have just hung on? Could I have just hung on? What if? But we always do that. I think every runner thinks like, could I have shaved a few more minutes off my marathon PR, that kind of thing. And maybe that's what keeps us going, not ever constant pursuit.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is part of the strength that we have as runners. Yeah. Because did you not, if you didn't have that, what would be the reason to push through those hard moments? It's really interesting to think about, and a discussion that's kind of ongoing with this podcast. And another thing with this race, you had a say their names temporary tattoo on your arm during this race. Can you tell us about your decision to do that? And did you feel scared to do that in any way? That, you've already put yourself in the public eye many times, but this is a whole new area of it.
Yeah. This 2020 was a year where I think a lot of us, for many different reasons, started kind of examining our values and where we stood on issues. And, I think a lot of people had to take a very hard look at themselves. And, there are events going on around the race, and I felt like it was important to me to speak out. And perhaps, in hindsight, there's a part of me that's like, I could have done more. But do it in a way to to realize that I don't have to, as a runner, only stick to running. And I think that, a lot of us have had this conversation this past year, and having a lot of people tell us with social justice issues to quote unquote stay in our lanes, to stick to running, to not speak out. And you make a decision, I think, as an athlete, or as any person, it doesn't even have to be as an athlete, but be like, okay, well, what feels right to me, and what in my internal compass feels like I am living in accordance to what I value. And so that's really kind of where, like, where my decision came to with that. And it's funny, like, and I wasn't really scared of any blowback. And it's funny because I'm sure like many other people, tons of people on social media have been like, sent nasty messages or said, I'm not following you because I don't want you to talk about things other than running. And I'm like, newsflash, I've been talking about eating disorders for the past like 2 years. I've been talking about plenty of other things than running. I'm also an attorney. Like, running is a very small part of me as a person. And so I do think this entire past year has been a great exercise in athletes to kind of embrace all parts of yourself. And to realize that you have more to offer than just running, and like feel free to speak your mind about it. You know, so
it's interesting because it is, we talked about at the very beginning of not being defined by running, and the community will say to you, "Oh, you're more than a runner. You have so much to offer this world. You are loved." But then you say, "Okay, well, here's another part of me. This is important to me," and people say, how dare you talk about that topic? Like that's like, I follow you because of your running, or, I get that all the time now that people say, I follow you for running advice. And I'm like, again, same as you, I want to say, like, newsflash, that is not the number one thing in my life anymore. Like, yes, I still run most days, but it's probably third or fourth on my list of things. So, if you want to just follow me for that, then how can you say to not define myself as a runner when that's all you're asking me for? So it is tricky, and it's been interesting to see who has kind of stayed very quiet, just stuck along the script, and who has veered away and had some consequences. But almost, I feel myself that I feel more empowered and confident in who I am by taking that step. Whereas you talked about earlier, it's the anticipation, that idea of, I think I'm going to post about this thing, and it's quite controversial or something I don't want to talk about. But once you do it, you're like, yeah, like I did that. And like, who cares what you say now? And obviously it does matter. It's always those negative things are always going to hit you in the heart. But you're able to brush off, or at least I find I'm able to brush off and move on, because it's that reality of what you and I discussed at the very beginning, that you say I'm not defined as a runner, so I'm not going to define myself as a runner. I am going to show all these parts of myself. So I appreciate you doing that. And you mentioned about thinking, could I have done more? And interviewing Jordan Brings Three White Horses, Daniel, a few months ago, she talked about doing prayer runs. And I've thought about this a lot myself, of races in the future. So you had the Say Their Names tattoo, temporary tattoo, and she would dedicate miles of her run to certain people. And even if she didn't say them, like literally say their names out loud, she could at least think about them and pray for them at the beginning of the mile, and then the rest of the mile focus on what she was doing. Have you thought about doing anything like that in future, or is that not really?
Yeah. I mean, no, it's a brilliant idea. And I've also thought about, running, and actually with Biggs, I thought about, doing pledging for the number of miles that I ran, like pledging to charity, along those lines, and other things in those regards. So there's a lot of ideas out there. And I think that more and more we're seeing people bring social justice and bring important issues into their running, which I actually love, and even if people are bringing it into a way that I don't necessarily agree with, I just think that it's something that we need to keep, as it's cliche, but keeping the conversation going, and recognizing that we are not athletes in a vacuum. And part of me, the thing that gets me going is I love the messiness of humans, and kind of like the nitty gritty. And like, we all have different parts of ourselves. And that's why I follow people. And that's why I relate to people, not because you post a really cool workout. I'm like, sweet, anyone can do that,
For sure.
But yeah, so I do love how many professional athletes have come out this past year and just, started to take stands. And I think we're seeing a huge shift, in what athletes kind of think of themselves as, for sure.
Thank you to Tracksmith for their continued support into this new year of the Running for Real podcast and Running for Real brand. As we start 2021, Tracksmith continues their tradition of encouraging no days off, which is their annual call for patience, persistence, and participation in running. No days off is not as a race towards injury, but an appeal for moderation, to leave a little in the tank every day so you can come back tomorrow. Now, I just want to clarify, this does not mean you have to run every single day, and Tracksmith is encouraging you to do that. You know, I am the last person who is going to be suggesting running every day especially when you're not used to it. But just in general, I take at least 2 days off a week right now, if not 3. And I feel that is okay. And I still feel I can participate in the No Days Off campaign. So what does No Days Off mean to me? Well, to me, I think No Days Off means honestly being kind to myself every day, reminding myself that I'm doing the best I can, that everyone is doing the best they can. And I think for me, that's something I'm really focusing on this year. I think it's very important for us to, yes, get out there and do our exercise, but also if you are unable to, if you've had a really, really bad night's sleep, or if you have a ton going on with your job, or if things are stressful and tough right now, it is okay to take a day off and to be kind to yourself and to let yourself off the hook. Or if you miss a workout or miss a strength training, I see the No Days Off campaign as a way to monitor and just check, how are we treating ourselves, especially when it comes to running, when we are out there with our own thoughts and our inner critic is just ready to go, ready on the sidelines to attack us with anything it can grab. So that's what it means to me. And in the past, I think I would have taken it literally that if you're going to get to your goal, you have to really commit to the things that you want to do. And that means taking no days off. That means doing all those little things. And while I think that is great, I also think this is just quite a tough time for us all. And so I think we're more likely, actually studies show that we are more likely to get things done, to reach things, to achieve things if we give ourselves self-love and compassion. So I want to thank Tracksmith for continuing to do this and to encouraging people. Every order you make right now, you will get a poster with the No Days Off calendar on it. So you can definitely check that out. And you can learn out more about the No Days Off campaign by checking out the link going to tracksmith.com/discount/Tina15. And Tracksmith is offering new customers $15 off your first purchase of $75 or more. So you can use code TINA15 at checkout by going to tracksmith.com/discount/Tina15. Some of my favorite items right now are the Alston tights, and I am still loving the Harrier long sleeves. You can definitely go check that out. And actually, Tracksmith does have a really good page with their guide to winter running. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. They have a men's and a women's one separately. I will put a link in the show notes for that, so be sure to check that out. Thank you again to Tracksmith.
But yeah, so I do love how many professional athletes have come out this past year and just, started to take stands. And I think we're seeing a huge shift in what athletes kind of think of themselves as, for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And thanks for being willing to talk about this as well. And one more thing related to that before we move on. So you've talked about being introverted. And for many people listening and many people that I've spoken to within the community, they hear about increasing the diversity within their friends, about meeting people who have come from different backgrounds and situations. And have you thought, and as someone who people look up to, but also as someone who talks about being an introvert, have you thought about how you're going to navigate that, how you're going to meet people and build your friendship group to be people who don't just look like you? And there's no right answer.
Yeah.
I'm curious for your thoughts.
No. And I will say it is tough given where I live too sometimes, because, it is just by nature not a very diverse area, which is unfortunate. But I think that the number one thing that I started doing a few years ago is definitely diversifying my social media feed. Yeah. It's the number one. And I think that I initially did that when I was in treatment for an eating disorder by diversifying to like include a lot of health at every size and to like the different sizes and shapes of bodies in my feed, you know, and then different ethnicities and following accounts that necessarily maybe don't resonate with me because I don't share their experiences, but trying to learn about how they navigate through the world. And then understanding like, holy shit, like I never like you don't things that certain people think about on a daily basis are things that have never crossed my mind in my 37 years of life because we all have different privileges and, you know, and I have a lot of privileges, and, you know, various privileges in my life. And so I think just even trying to put yourself and think about those issues and so much compassion. So I really, important thing for me is with any of the companies that I work with, I really want to make sure that they have a diversified, you know, stable of athletes. And I think that that's really important for anybody working within a company, within a brand, to really push for that. And I spoke to all of my sponsors this past year, about like what they were doing in terms of those steps. And, you know, and in some that didn't actually come out publicly and say anything, but then I learned through those conversations that they were doing a lot of stuff internally. And actually do more than some companies that came out and made a blanket statement, but then did nothing to back that up. So, you know, I think I'm looking forward to races starting up again because I would love, I think there's a lot of initiatives to just like create a more inclusive environment. And I don't necessarily have all the answers for that. But it's really something that is important to me for sure.
So true. And for the listeners, I mean, hold those brands that you interact with and follow and are interested in and believe in this year, because as Amelia said, a lot of brands did statements, said, we are doing this. But then by now the interest, they know that maybe they can slide unnoticed without actually changing anything. So hold them accountable, keep as we said earlier, keep the conversation going, because as much as it might feel like one voice doesn't make a difference, if that one voice is combined with, you know, 10 of you who are running a brand that 10 of you listening follow, then that might be enough to keep them honest and keep them on that path. So
absolutely.
Thanks for your advice there. That's it's just interesting, and it's good to think about and hear from others, especially someone like you said who is introverted. It's easy to that's an easy win, especially the social media one you mentioned. And yeah. Okay, so looking back at 2020, it was a tough year. Before we go any deeper, how would you say you handled the year and handled all the things going wrong in terms of, just Amelia in 2020?
Yeah, I had a very rough start to 2020. I will say that, the emergence of COVID flared all of my mental health issues to the biggest extreme. And what I did learn though, and this is something that's not new to me, but that I've never done well with change. I go through massive anxiety with any type of change. But I will ride that wave and get through it. It just takes a little bit longer than some people. So for me, I realized I was in a paralyzed state of anxiety from February, well, probably actually mid-January. I was an early adopter of pandemic fear, through the end of April, May, and I was just paralyzed by everything. And, but what was funny is that all of a sudden, things started calming down, and I started realizing I started settling in. And so now I think what I've kind of realized is that whenever there's a shift, whenever there's a change in my life, I'm going to have a lot of anxiety around it. I'm going to be a wreck. But I just kind of have to ride that wave and I'll get through it. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of this idea that everything in my life, I'm just doing life reps over and over and over and over again. And then also just realizing, and I think this past year is recognizing the resiliency, mm-hmm. And that I can actually adapt a lot more than I thought I was going to be able to. If I look at in this past year, I moved cross country, bought a house, got a new car, got a dog. Like my life is completely 180 degrees changed from where I was this time last year. And I've survived it. And it's actually, honestly, it hasn't been that bad. Mm-hmm. So just learning that, I think, has been really important to me.
Yeah. And I think I love that you know yourself so well that you can recognize things as they're happening, see a pattern and think, okay, here I am, this is happening. But know that, you will come out the other side. You will understand it and be able to move on from it. And I think, again, this all comes down to with this episode that you have truly figured out what those things are about you that matter to you, but also the things that just make you and are able to understand that. So I hope this is a lesson for people in taking a deep dive into understanding themselves. It's all too easy to blot it out with listening to things all the time or having the TV on when you're alone in the house or all these things so that you don't ask those questions. And I noticed that a lot with social media, whenever there's that tough question that someone might be asking, and I do this quite a lot on social media, people just say, oh, no, I don't want to deal with that question. But if it's what did someone eat for breakfast kind of thing, people are like, oh yeah, I'll answer that. I'll think about that.
Yeah, exactly.
When really so many of us need to sit and just be with allow those things to come out. And if you hear what Amelia is saying and you are jealous and thinking, wow, I really wish I knew myself that well, you can. You just need to be with those thoughts and it's going to be scary. So with that, for someone who is thinking, okay, all right, I'm going to spend some time with myself, but I'm scared for what's going to come up here. I don't know. I don't like the parts of me that I'm going to be allowing to come out of the box here. So what would be your advice there?
Yeah, it's a great question because it can actually get really scary, which is why it's very important to do it in a supportive environment as much as you can. Because when things started coming out of the box for me, I started dealing with old trauma from my past. And I actually felt in many ways like I was regressing. And that, I was like, my anxiety is getting worse. My eating disorder thoughts are getting worse because I'm finally opening this past year. Yeah. Okay. Because I was opening up a Pandora's box of so many things that I had kind of just did not deal with for so many years. And so finally, once I had kind of cut through the superficial part of the eating disorder and kind of got down to the stuff underneath it, it's very scary. And so I think the number one thing is if you are going to do a deep dive, do it with a mental health professional, a trained mental health professional, bring people in your life, into it. And, this isn't don't bring, all of Instagram into your trauma past, but let
me do an Instagram live while I discuss this.
Exactly. I mean, there are certain things that, but I had a few people in my life that I felt like I could reach out to. And when I would go into a dark time because of this and have those guide rails. And then also for me, I think the number one thing is learning to verbalize this to people and about the support system in my life, about what I need, what I'm going through. And knowing that they can't read my mind. So I'm going to have to speak up and ask for things and have needs, which is really scary, I think, for a lot of people. When you just say, all I need right now is a hug, or something like that. Granted, the pandemic kind of created a monster with that. But so I really think just doing the work, having a support group, and then also getting out of it, because it's important to dive in and do some work, but you can go down a rabbit hole. And so we would do this practice called self-inquiry in treatment. And it's 5 to 10 minutes of deep dive. And then you pull yourself back out of it, because there is a possibility that you stick in the quagmire of your own gnarly thoughts for too long and you make it worse. So I think it's important to not to have some levity as well in your life.
For sure.
Not always like be trying to fix yourself and be trying to, cure things and whatnot. So,
Well, definitely. And I think that I've come across a few people lately who have said to me, I'm trying to be strong. I'm trying to, I'm trying to be strong. I'm trying to be brave, and work through this. And I'll say, who are you working through it with? And they're like, no, I'm trying to be strong myself. I'm like, well, you're not like, I think that's amazing. You're trying, but you need people around you. This isn't something that like the strongest and the bravest can go about it themselves. The strongest and the bravest are the ones who say, I need some help. And related to that, a question for someone who's thinking, I can't lay this burden on any people I love. Like they all have their own stuff going on. And then adding another element of, I can't afford to speak to a mental health professional. For someone because I know there's people thinking that, what would you say there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think in terms of, I have dealt with the feeling a burden or to everyone in my life for so many years. And that's been a lot of what I've had to work through. I think number one is, learning that if you have a few close friends that you can talk to, I always check in if I need to unload something, if I need to vent, if I need to process something. I always ask them like, do you have space right now for this? Can you hold this for me? And then then they are kind of like a willing participant. And then also realize that sometimes they may say like, no, like I have way too much going on in my life right now. Like, can we hold that and like talk about that in a few days? So I think that respecting boundaries of other people has helped me to not feel like so much of a quote unquote burden. Because I know that they are actually, when they say, yeah, no, please, like I have the space and time to talk about this right now. And I know that it comes from a good place. In terms of the mental health, oh my God, my number one crusade in life would be to have more affordable mental health access for people. It's so tough. And I understand why mental health counselors like don't take insurance and whatnot. But there are a lot of free or reduced cost resources out there. Bigger Than the Trail is a resource in the trail running community that actually can help you, pair you with a counselor, and help cover mental health costs. There are a lot of sliding scales out there if you talk to mental health professionals. I'm really hoping we make mental health more affordable, but I do understand the access issue for a lot of people. So I wish I had better answers.
And there is no easy fix right now. And, if someone listening is at a really bad point, you obviously know there are places to go. And there are apps and websites that can be used. But you don't have to get to a really, really dark place to go seek help and take advantage of some of those opportunities, or not take advantage, but to use some of those opportunities. So don't be afraid to at least seek it out and see. They might have suggestions for somewhere else you can go. Finally, I would also make a plug. I mean, crisis hotlines. I have called crisis hotlines many a times. Okay. And they are free, and you don't have to be at rock bottom to use them. Okay. So really important point. Thank you. Finally, just related to this a little bit, living alone. You have talked about this quite a bit. I know there's a lot of people listening who have talked with me about struggling through living alone, particularly with the year that we've had, particularly in this winter time of year. It is the hardest time of year. Do you have any advice for people who are really struggling with having spent this whole year apart, having maybe not spent holiday season with family, and just living alone has felt so lonely?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a huge issue for me this past year, because of just feeling so isolated, knowing that community is the thing that I want more than anything, but not being able to do that. really important for me. And as much as I know we all have so much technology fatigue and Zoom fatigue at this point, but it is really making a point to, like make connections and call. And I hated FaceTime before. I've always hated FaceTime. And it is now like my favorite thing in the world to connect with my family through FaceTime, to be able to do that. And I think another thing that's really helped me is just, and I know it's hard with the weather right now, but just even being outdoors around where other people may be, is, something that makes you kind of feel like you're not totally alone. So it's avoiding the isolation of my house, I think, as much as possible.
Yeah.
And really just reaching out and maintaining those connections. And I wish I had a better answer, because I really do miss large group activities.
Yeah.
But for anyone who's out there struggling who lives alone, like I'm right there with you. I am totally right there with you.
Well, thank you. And have you found with reaching out to people, even people who, have families, like young children, or have what you think are busy lives, that sometimes they're appreciative that you've reached out, that they too will, even though they're surrounded by people, sometimes feeling lonely or feeling like trapped or needing someone. I mean, it's very easy to feel when you're the one on your own that you're, again, a burden on people. They've got their own people to be with, but have just for someone who hasn't taken that step to reach out to those they love or care about, who are in a situation that they think they don't need them. What's been your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I've found they've been welcome with open arms. Honestly, a lot of my friends who have young kids and are just with themselves and their partner are like, oh, thank God I can talk to somebody else right now, aside from just my immediate family. I think that everyone is like going through their own struggles right now, in different forms and things like that. So I've found people extremely receptive. And I've also kind of have built this network of other friends that I have that I know are also entirely alone. And then we have this like Lonely Hearts Friendship Club. That sounds so sad. But, no, I mean, it is a way, like, cause that they are going through the same thing that you're going through. Sure. And I think that that's just such a great point of connection.
Absolutely.
Sure.
When I was in college and I did have one of my only big injuries, that needed to be in a pool. I had to be in the pool running for a month. There was 3 or 4 of us who were all injured, and we called ourselves the Ugly Ducklings Club, because that same thing of like we hated being in the pool, but we at least knew we had each other, and we felt like we were a part of something because we couldn't be part of the main team during that time. So, you reminded me of that. Okay, so going into 2021. This year, do you have goals? Do you have plans? How are you approaching this, with how 2020 has been and just what you've learned over the last year?
Yeah, I do not have anything on my calendar right now, which I have to say is the first time in a really long time, because in terms of racing, I guess in terms of life in general, but I think I'm just trying to do what I'm really bad at, which is go with the flow, and just kind of see what pops up, see what opportunities pop up. If races pop up, then go for them, and just kind of keep myself. My number one goal is to emerge from all of this like healthy and ready to rock and roll when racing finally comes back into being a thing. And then just kind of, and be creative, I think. Maybe look more at FKTs again, just random adventures, elliptico across the United States. I don't know. No, I won't do that. No, I have thought about it.
That would be cool.
But, well, I wanted to be the first person to do it. And then I realized there actually been a lot of people that have done it. So,
actually, I think I know that. Yeah. I've heard of a few people over the years that have done that. Yeah, that's true.
Right. So, So I don't know. I mean, I think I'm just trying to embrace it as another year of adventure, and being okay with the unknown, because I'm really bad at that. And this entire past year has been actually a really good learning experience for me with just dealing with so much uncertainty. And I do believe sometimes I kind of hate this entire, what are the silver linings of this pandemic situation? But I do actually believe this will, in a lot of ways, people are going to understand and like how resilient they are, and have so much gratitude then, for like everything, all the opportunities that we took for granted before this as well.
For sure. I agree. I think the vast majority of people are going to be able to look back on this time having learned and grown in a way that we don't know how that is now, but in a year's time from now, we probably will be able to see that, or in a few years, maybe. Okay. Yeah. Amelia, we'll put links in the show notes for everyone to go find you and follow you. Anything else you would like to tell people as they go into this year, before we part ways?
No, I mean, I think number one, the one thing that I would spread right now is just compassion for yourself, compassion for others, because everyone is going through different battles right now. And that to me is the one thing that we need more of in this world, is just total compassion for each other.
Agreed. Thank you so much. I appreciate you and all that you've done for our community. Yeah. You are wonderful. Thank you. Before we end this episode, I just want to take a moment to shout out my podcast editor, Jeremy Nessel, who has done such a wonderful job of looking after my podcast, taking out all the mishaps in the episodes, while still keeping in the vulnerability and the realness and the rawness of the conversation. This is not one of those podcasts where I take out the ums and the ers and the sometimes the delay in words, because I think it's very important to keep that authenticity. We're surrounded by perfected and manicured everything, and I think it's really important that Running for Real stays that way. So thank you to Jeremy for your work. I also want to thank Maria Vargas and Amber Moore, who are also part of my team. They've been a big part of this community and me being able to build this brand. So just want to give them a shout out too. All right, let's get right back to the end of this episode. Thank you to Amelia once again for your vulnerability, your openness, and just for sharing your journey with us. I hope you enjoyed that episode with her. I always enjoy digging in deeper with my guests and getting to know the sides of them and the parts of them that they haven't talked about before. I hope I did some unique question asking. That's not a word, is it? I hope I gave her some unique questions in that episode and you enjoyed that. I just want to take a moment to re-thank our sponsors of this episode. So that is Momentous, and I talked about the creatine in the episode, how this can help you with your cognitive function and just with your energy production. You can use code TINA at livemomentous.com to get 20% off your order. I want to thank Goodr for sponsoring this episode. You can go to Goodr, that's GOODR.com, GOODR.com/Tina, or use code Tina at Goodr.com to get 15% off your order. That is valid through the end of the month. Then we will be changing the code to do something a bit different, which I'm excited to share with you. And finally, I want to thank Tracksmith, and you can get $15 off your order of 75 or more by going to tracksmith.com and using code TINA15. And next week, I am excited that we will be having Nat Mitchell on the show. Many of you may know Nat or have heard of Nat on other podcasts, but I've really, again, gone into a different direction with her, and it was a really enjoyable conversation. So I'm looking forward to sharing that one with you. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Running for Real podcast. Be sure to check out tinamuir.com for show notes and even more helpful running information.